We have a very underrated watch. It's not very popular in front of the camera today. This is the Omega Seamaster Railmaster Coaxial Master Chronometer. This thing retails at $5,200 and is not a very popular model within the Omega lineup. And let's talk about the reasoning behind that as we take a look at the good and the bad and the details of this sport watch. Now, I have to mention that this is based off of the Omega Railmaster that debuted in 1957. So it definitely has some retro elements, but it's not a one-to-one. There was a limited edition Railmaster that came out recently that was almost a one-to-one of that historic model. So I look at this and I definitely see something different, something contemporary that has strong retro vintage design cues to it. And maybe it's too out there, maybe it's too different, and that's why it's not seen as a super popular model. But you know what? In my eyes, that's a good thing, because there are some gems out there that don't get the love and attention that I think that they deserve. And this certainly falls into that category. There is a lot of good things going on here. There are some bad things too, and we'll get to that. Let's start with the dimensions. We have 40.4 millimeters in overall diameter. We have 46.4 in overall lug-to-lug length, which for a 40.4 millimeter diameter watch, that is relatively short. So this is going to be very comfortable on wrist, especially if you have smaller wrists or smaller sport watch preferences. 12.7 in overall height. And notice that is a slight dome on the sapphire crystal that carries anti-reflective treatment. So, still under 13, a touch on the tall side, but it doesn't feel too tall. And maybe that's aided by the fact that it has a relatively short lug-to-lug length. We have 20 millimeter lugs with a small taper to 18 millimeter at the butterfly style clasp. The watch carries 150 meters of water resistance and a screw down crown at the 3 o'clock position that's done in this modern cupcake form that Omega has been placing in many of their models. Now let's talk about the finishing, because this is unique, and maybe this is a reason why this is kind of an unpopular Omega. This is entirely brushed, and I mean entirely. You look at the case, you look at the lyre style lugs where that twisted flare curves down. That's normally high polish. You guys can see that on my own Speedmaster that I'm wearing today. This is all done in the brush finish. The bezel, which is normally all high polish on, say, an Aquaterra, is all brushed here. The chapter ring is all brushed. You look at the dial, and the dial has this very deep vertical brushing. It's reflective. It has great light play. And I really like the aesthetic here because it's taken to the maximum. It's all brushed, and there's something about it that's austere, and it works. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it really does. Like with the Tudor Pelagos, I think that one is an all brush finish watch that works really well. And likewise, I think the Railmaster works very well when it's all brush. I don't know, there's something about it that works. So let's take a look at the dial on a macro level where you guys can see this very deep graining. There is a railroad track running along the circumference of the dial, and it's broken up by these triangular markers. Now they're not applied and they're not quite printed as well. You guys can see a very flush or flat look to it. It's also not quite a traditional sandwich dial. So let me show you a traditional sandwich like on the Panerai that I'm wearing today, this base Panerai. What is going on here is Omega has cut out these markers and they've filled it with vintage Superluminova, so it has a flush look, very similar to what Panerai is currently doing with their printed dials. So in low light, it's nice and deep. It's better than if it was just printed on the top of a traditional dial, if that makes sense. So good potency, good longevity. And I will note that this Omega does not carry a bi-color lume application. This is all one color, and it looks really good. There's a decent amount of surface area or real estate for the low light luminescent compound. Now, that's another point that I think is a love it or hate it thing. Most watch enthusiasts that I know hate vintage looking Superluminova. It's too warm. It's too creamy. It just doesn't look good. And I would tend to agree with you on most watches. I think it's overdone. But again, like the all brush finish, in some instances, it works well because you look at this and really, again, everything is monotone and mono finish. And if it was white, I don't know. I think that would be just too clinical. I don't know. It's too clean, too boring. I want a little bit of life. I want a little bit of contrast. And so I think the old radium tone strengthens the retro design elements here, and it works in this instance, whereas it wouldn't work in a different watch. Does that make sense? Now, going back to the dial, we also have black printing. We have printed Arabic markers 12, 3, 6, and 9. Master chronometer and coaxial is printed in black, as is the logo. And then notice Railmaster is printed in that warm tone that matches the vintage Superluminova. And I love the fact that Omega has gone with the old font from 1957, the stylized font there. I think that looks great. Now let's talk about the movement. What we have inside the watch is the coaxial 8806 caliber. Now I'm going to show you macro of an 8800 because it is based off of the 8800. Basically, it's the no date variation of the 8800. So 55 hours of power reserve, 35 joules, a beat frequency of 25,200 beats per hour. So it's not quite as smooth as a 4 hertz sweep, but definitely not as stuttery, I guess you could say, as a 3 hertz beat frequency. We have a free sprung balance set in a full balance bridge. The hairspring is fashioned out of silicon, and again, this is a METIS certified and a COSC certified movement with machine arabesque finishing. And I love the fact that it has those two different certifications. So it's going to be very well dialed in and tested. METIS goes to a much tighter and more involved process than what the COSC does. So they test the accuracy in multiple positions, multiple temperatures, with a full power reserve, with a low power reserve. They test the anti-magnetic properties. And so this will be anti-magnetic to 15,000 Gauss, which is just an absurd number, something that you would never come across in everyday situation. So it's nice to know that your watch is accurate, dialed in. It's not going to be affected by magnetic flux or fields, and it will do very well with shock, with the stability of the free sprung balance in the full balance bridge. That architecture is great. So I like the look. It's kind of a shame that you can't see it through an exhibition case back. And that is kind of the norm nowadays when it comes to Omega. A lot of their watches are showing you where the majority of your money is being put into, and that is the movement and the certifications, the accuracy, the technology, the overhead that went into the development of these coaxial calibers. So I think if you were to buy an Omega, you only wanted one, I would recommend maybe going for a model that has an open case back, because you know what? I like looking at this movement. It's not the best finished movement. It's not the most beautiful movement, but there is something alluring to it. And I like to see it. So if you buy a Seamaster 300, if you buy a Planet Ocean, if you buy an Aquaterra, a Globemaster, you'll all be, with all of those models, you'll be able to see the movement. And maybe if you're a fan of Omega like I am, and you own a couple different watches, maybe you have a Sapphire Sandwich, maybe you have a Seamaster Professional or something. It would be nice to have something different, because this engraved stainless steel case back, it looks good. It's detailed, but it's not harsh. Like, it's not sharp, whereas if you're wearing this, you're going to get a hot spot. That's not the case. It's very well executed. And Omega has developed something that they call the Naiad lock system. So every time you look at a watch, an Omega case back that carries the Naiad system, it's going to be perfectly aligned north to south so that you can read the text. And if there's an icon or a printing or a sticker or something, it's always going to be north to south aligned with the hands of the watch. It's nice. I don't know. Maybe I just don't see that as a priority for engineering that type of system. But I guess I would say that it is nice to see that alignment when it comes to the design here. Now let's talk about the bracelet and the negative elements as we wrap up this presentation. So we have a nice bracelet, again, all brushed, and this one is a used example that I have on loan from Exquisite Timepieces. So if you were to buy a Seamaster Railmaster coaxial master chronometer brand new and wear it around a lot, this is what it would look like after some use. You can see some hairline wear mark on the bracelet. And I think this looks so much better than the PCLs of an Aquaterra. I've always recommended Omega that they brush out their bracelets on the Aquaterra. It's beautiful, but over time, it shows wear and tear a lot. And so I like the all brush finish on the bracelet of the Railmaster. And I like the fact that each one of these links is a separate piece of stainless steel. So you get full articulation. You get a very nice drape on wrist. And each one of the links is held together via a screw pin system. So there's actually double screw heads on either side of each one of these links. And they connect to a rather substantial bar in the middle that holds the links together. So it's very secure. There is a little bit of flex to it. It's not Rolex rigid, but it's not Grand Seiko loose, in my opinion. So I like the bracelet. What I don't like so much, and this is probably the biggest niggle or nitpick of the Railmaster model, is the clasp. We have a butterfly clasp. And as far as butterfly clasps go, it's a good one, right? We have a push button release on one side. The other side is a friction fit with ceramic ball bearings as the detent. That's nice to see. But I don't know, when you're buying a sport watch, especially one from Omega, where they make some great deployant clasps with micro extension systems where you can adjust the travel on the fly without the need of a tool, that's what I want to see on this Railmaster. And so the fact that this doesn't have it is a bit of a letdown, even though the butterfly system here is perfectly functional. You know, it's nice as far as butterfly systems go. I just don't want a butterfly system on this Railmaster. And maybe that's one of the reasons why this is one of those more unheralded, models. It's all brushed. It's got the old radium loom. It doesn't have an open case back, and it doesn't have a great clasp like some of the other Omega models have really nice clasps. So that's my presentation. That wraps up my thoughts on the Railmaster. I think it's a great piece. I would wear this watch in my own rotation, but I wouldn't recommend this as your first Omega or maybe your only Omega. If you're only going to have one, I'd say go with one of their bigger icons like the Speedmaster, or one of their more impressive models that carries some pop and finesse like the Seamaster, where you can see the open case back, the coaxial movement. And if you're like me, and you enjoy Omega, maybe you've tried a few different models, maybe you own a few different models, I think this one is a fantastic accent piece to mix it up from time to time and wear something different and eye-catching and under the radar and unheralded. I think that's great. So guys, thanks for watching today. Reach out with any questions you may have. And if you're shopping for an Omega, I'm going to give you Nick's cell phone in the description. He works at Exquisite. Great customer service. He works with you on price as much as possible. So definitely talk to Nick if you're shopping for an Omega. And this one actually comes from the pre-owned inventory from Exquisite. So if you want this exact watch that I featured today, let me know. I can talk to Nick for you, see if we can cut a deal. That is available, linked in the description. Thanks again, guys. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.